Bonus points for coming out, even though there is snow on the ground. I mean, we're in Michigan, so really everyone should be as brave as you are, but I know that it's a struggle for folks, so thank you for leaving your house and coming out here for another episode of Nerd Nite. Compositions and control, but essentially we're talking football and AI, folks, like the things that you might have been talking about today anyways. But don't worry, well, there'll still be some great Nerd Nite diversions. First of all, like I said, I'm Emily. I am from the Ann Arbor District Library. This is the only Nerd Nite which happens across the world. It's the only one that I'm aware of that's sponsored by a library, which means it's the only one with no cover. So thank you to the AADL for letting us do this, because I love it, and I hope you do too. Also thanks to Live. How many nightclubs will open early and let us put chairs on the dance floor so that we can be here and gather as nerds at a reasonable hour? So I'm really grateful to Live, and of course I'm thankful to all of you for coming. And there would be no Nerd Nite if we didn't have our speakers, and we've got a great set of 3 for you tonight. We have Eleanna Varangis, who's telling us to get your head out of the game, teaching how sport concussions affect our brain health. Then we have Molly Jones talking about machines making music. And then Frank Murphy with Take Me to Your Leader, how AI will shape power and politics in the 21st century. But first, I did promise you something that wasn't timely, and that's your Nerd Nite Minute, which is where your MC talks for a minute or two about something they find interesting. And for me today, that's the Viewmaster. Out of curiosity, who here had a Viewmaster growing up? Look at all those hands. That makes me so happy because I loved mine. But when I started doing a little bit of research about it, I was kind of surprised at a couple turns it took, because it did not start as a toy. So first things first, we're going to go back to the 1920s, actually 1919. This guy named Ed Mayer in Oregon started working, developing photos at Owl Drug in Oregon. He was a pharmacist, but photos were new. He started doing this, and then found that, hey, this is actually pretty good business. And by the mid-1920s, he was making most of his business by selling souvenir scenic postcards. And then in 1938, he teamed up with this guy named William Gruber to use Kodak film to make a stereoscopic device, which is actually what like the Viewmaster type device is really called. So the way that it works is that you have 7 sets of images with one image, one little bit of film for each eye, so that you get that little bit of like the 3D effect that those of you who had the Viewmasters might remember how cool and magic it was. And what they found was that this works really great. It's kind of like an interactive postcard. So this is one of the reels for the Viewmasters for Toronto and in Ontario. But the timing of this was really perfect because they did this in 1938, and in 1939 was the World Fair. So that's when it really took off, because it was like this moving sort of postcard that folks got to take as a souvenir from the World Fair. But then this was a really interesting diversion I found, which then the U.S. Armed Forces said, these are really neat, and we could use these. And so during World War II, they bought, I think, something like 20 to 40,000 of these, and had reels showing things like sites in Germany, and here are the different kind of planes. And the Air Force was actually using viewfinders as their training. And in fact, this image comes from the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force. Don't go flying out there now, though. It's not currently on display. So this is the closest you can get to see it. But then finally, in the 1950s, they realized, hey, we're missing out on a big market here because it's kids. And what brought it to them was Disneyland. So it ended up starting out like this moving postcards from your trip to Disneyland. You could get this Viewmaster. And then they realized, you know, it doesn't even have to be for a place that you go. It could be cartoon stories. It could be anything. We should be selling this to kids. And so they did. And so kids like all of us got to excitedly open them. I still remember getting mine and calling out, "It's a Shoemaster!" And so, unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, they don't make them anymore. They tried, they went into VR, which you would think that they would. Kind of makes sense. But it petered out, and now they don't make them anymore. So maybe, hopefully, seeing how many people had them before, there'll be a resurgence. But if you still have yours from whatever decade you grew up, maybe hold on to it, because maybe future generations might also like a Viewmaster. And that is your Nerd Nite Minute. And now we go to more topical things. Please join me. I'm so happy to welcome Eleanna. She is an assistant professor of movement science in the School of Kinesiology at U of M and is a member of the Faculty Council of the Michigan Concussion Center. Her research focuses on the long-term effects of sports participation and concussions on cognitive function and brain health across the lifespan. Outside the lab and classroom, she loves watching football and baseball. She says, "Go Yankees." Great. I don't know. I do not watch football and baseball. She also loves cooking, traveling, and encouraging her 5-year-old and 3-year-old to please stop hitting their heads on things. Please join me in welcoming Eleanna. Here, you want to step on? I'll let you use your hands.
Sounds perfect. Thank you. Hello, everyone. So Even closer, okay. As promised, I am Eleanna Varangis. It's lovely to meet you all. And today I'm going to talk about taking your head out of the game and kind of talking a little bit about sport concussions and how they affect us both kind of acutely, but also in the long term, decades after. So before I start this talk, I just want to get a sense, how many of you all played some kind of sport at some point in your life to some degree of organization? Just raise your hand if you played any kind of sport. Okay. So a lot of folks. So that's great, because youth sports participation, we know, is associated with great outcomes for kids, both kind of as their children, but also kind of long term. So kids who play sports tend to have healthier hearts, healthier bones, healthier brains. They're just healthier people. So it's always great to play a sport when you're a kid. They also tend to have lower levels of things like depression, and it helps them form really tight, great social bonds. So sports are so great for kids when they're growing up, and we're so excited when they start doing all kinds of sports as kids. But we also know that, kind of the womp womp moment, we know that sports are associated with higher risk for injuries. So all kinds of injuries, unfortunately. And we know that the kind of good news is that most injuries resolve pretty quickly over a period of like weeks. And kids tend to kind of recover and bounce right back. It's terrifying sometimes how quickly they bounce back, but it's great that they bounce back. And in many cases, they're just out for a couple weeks, and then they're feeling totally fine and back to their usual selves. And one injury that we know can happen in sport is concussions. So each year, there are approximately 1.7 to 3.8 million concussions reported, and about 10% of these tend to be sport-related. And this is according to CDC data. And so we know that a decent chunk of our total concussions that happen are associated with risk for injury in sports specifically. And we know that of all the sports, contact and collision sports carry greater risk for concussions. So sports that involve contacts between athletes or hits to the head, we know are probably going to be associated with higher risk for concussions. So collision sports, think things like football, ice hockey, men's lacrosse, and, well, this is actually semi-controversial. Sometimes it includes wrestling, sometimes it doesn't. But all kinds of sports where you're kind of impacting people and you tend to lead with your head a little bit more. And contact sports, things like basketball, soccer, things like that. And we know that concussions in sport can occur from anything from impacts with other players, impacts with the ground, impacts with equipment. There are all kinds of ways people can hit their head in different sports, and they can happen in lots of different ways. We know that concussions tend to be associated with specific sets of symptoms, so things like dizziness, nausea, kind of seeing double, confusion, having difficulty remembering things after the fact, general like cognitive brain fog, a lot of people tend to report, headaches, all that kind of stuff. Typically these peak about 24 to 36 hours after injury, and then they slowly kind of start getting better. And so currently recovery from concussion we think of as happening for adults within 2 weeks, for kids within 3 weeks. So usually kids get back so much faster, but with concussions they actually take a little bit longer to kind of get back to their usual selves. And so as kids are recovering from concussion, we typically recommend things, or I say we as if I do anything like this. I am in no way a clinician. I'm the worst person to recommend to be a clinician. So clinicians that I trust, more so than myself, would recommend things like limited screen time, plenty of sleep. This is contrary to the antiquated notion that you should wake someone up every hour after concussion. That is no longer clinical recommendations. Now they say let them sleep, let their brains recover. Gradual return to exercise and activity by day 2 to 3. This is also kind of a new thing. They say by day 2, kids should be slowly starting to exercise again and kind of seeing how they feel. Kids who start exercising by day 2 to 3 tend to have much shorter recovery times than kids who don't. So great news for our active, overly hyper children. And a gradual return to school and work. So not kind of throwing yourself right back in, seeing how you feel, assessing symptoms as you go, and kind of gradually returning to things. And so the timeline of this kind of return to different types of activity is based on symptom presence and severity. So typically, you gradually, slowly step back into things. If symptoms get worse dramatically all of a sudden, we kind of step back and we start again. So it's very individualized. You kind of see what feels good, and you kind of respond accordingly. And as I said, we know that most symptoms of concussion resolve within 1 to 2 weeks for adults, and kind of 2 to 3 weeks for kids, I would say, and then with gradual return to full activity in like 2 to 3 or 4 weeks. So that's pretty much the way that concussions tend to resolve and look. And if someone has just one concussion, there's really no reason to believe there are going to be any lasting effects. Plenty of research has been done looking at, like, is one concussion going to be bad? At this point, I always joke that I have young children, and if one concussion was going to be the end of it, everyone would have died by age 5. So thankfully, I think one concussion is probably going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to recover. Your brain's going to recover. It's going to be fine long term. If someone has more than 1 to 2 concussions, it may take them a little bit longer to kind of get back to normal after the next concussion. So we typically see by like concussion 3, maybe it takes a little bit longer to get back to when they feel normal or back to their usual self. And so it can take a little bit longer for the brain to kind of recover and heal after, a couple concussions. And we also have found that people who play elite levels of football and had many hits to the head and sometimes many concussions may show earlier signs of things like cognitive impairment and dementia. And so I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and so to me, this was like an aha moment where I was like, we've got to focus on this. Like, what is happening within these former football players to where they're having these kind of earlier signs of cognitive impairment and dementia? This is a huge, huge focus for me. And so my question is kind of how do concussions affect the brain long term? And so we are starting to learn a little bit about this, and current evidence is pointing to the fact that maybe 1 to 2 concussions, again, not super likely to cause long-term problems. People have 1 or 2 concussions. This is a relatively frequent event where people have 1 to 2 concussions, either from sports or frankly anything, and they typically resolve, they typically return to normal function, and they're pretty much okay long term. But some studies show that people who have 3 or more concussions may show higher risk for things like cognitive impairment in older age. And so this is where things start to get interesting for me. These studies have suggested that multiple concussions may cause aggregation or kind of increased deposition of some proteins in the brain that can eventually affect thinking as we age. And so this part starts to get a little murky. We're not entirely sure how this happens. All we know is that in people who we've seen kind of decades later in life, some of them who've had multiple concussions have depositions of these proteins that we think of as being associated with things like neurodegenerative diseases. And so this is kind of an important point for researchers to really hone in on why they're showing more of these proteins later in life. And so we also find that people who've sustained multiple concussions, they also tend to have sustained a lot of hits to the head. So especially if these are sport-related concussions, which is usually the case for people who have 3 or more, it's likely that they played a sport where they're constantly hitting their heads against things, against people, against the ground, against sporting equipment. This is a very common occurrence. And so the question is kind of, is it the concussions that are incurring this risk, or is it something about just getting hit in the head repeatedly that's really not great for your brain? So the question is still kind of open. But one theory that kind of came about when other folks were doing this work was this idea that perhaps this is its own type of neurodegenerative disease that's present specifically in people who have a history of head impacts and concussions. And so they called this disease chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and I'm going to emphasize that this is a very rare neurodegenerative disease. This is not a super common thing, despite what the media might make you think. It is a very, very rare disease. And it was first discovered in 2005. I should say, in its current status, it was first discovered in 2005 in a former professional football player, Mike Webster. And so at autopsy, they kind of looked at his brain, and they found this unusual deposition of proteins within his brain that were associated with neurodegenerative diseases, but they were in kind of weird places. And so, neurally speaking, they characterized this disorder by abnormal aggregation of the tau protein. So tau is one of the two big proteins that we think of when we think of Alzheimer's disease. And when they looked at his brain, they found a lot of this protein, but not in the places that you would suspect it to be if he had had Alzheimer's disease. So it was a little bit different, and it was a little bit, I guess, raised alarms and caused a lot of people to get very interested in kind of what was going on in this gentleman's brain. And the thought was that perhaps this was happening because he'd had so many concussions and sport-related head impacts. He was a part of that heavy-hitting era of football in the 80s where everyone was kind of throwing themselves at each other. And I think there were anecdotal reports of the amount of scar tissue that he had on his forehead from just the number of hits that he'd taken to the head. So this was a particular case where I think it raised enough alarms that it really set the field in motion. So people kind of started mobilizing and really wondering what is going on here. And so after this case, many cases followed, and eventually they had enough cases to start talking about an idea of the staging of this disease. And so like any disease, they kind of found different stages of the disease that were associated with both different neural depositions of this tau protein and also different behavioral phenotypes, so different ways that people were acting. And so in the first stage, there were kind of no symptoms. There were maybe some little depositions of this tau protein in some parts of the brain. By stage 2, this had spread a little bit further, and there were some behavioral symptoms manifesting like rage, issues with impulsivity and depression. By stage 3, it was kind of further moving through, especially the temporal lobes, which we think of as being related to memory and learning. And we were getting confusion, memory loss. And by stage 4, we had quite advanced and profound dementia, where it was really affecting a lot more parts of the brain. So this was a really kind of alarming thing that they found, and they've done a lot of autopsies of different players and found this kind of similar pattern of deposition and similar idea of the neuropathology in a lot of different former NFL athletes. But to me, I thought this was super obviously alarming, and I think it's really noteworthy. But one thing really stood out to me. And so Bo Schembechler was famously quoted as saying, "No coach is more important than the team, the team, the team." And if I'm going to go down for any one saying, it's going to be no findings are more important than the sample, the sample, the sample. So we know for a fact that the people who were in this study were former NFL football players. The majority of them were. Many of them were former Division I collegiate athletes as well, but these are former elite football players. It's a very specific set of people. So this is just kind of a representation of some of the people who've been kind of diagnosed with CTE. And in much of this kind of CTE work, these were athletes who had donated their brains to science. In many cases, these are things diagnosed at autopsy. They were brains that were kind of donated to the lab. And that could have been because the person before they died thought, something's going on with me, I need to donate my brain. It could have been family concerns. They could have said, you know, he played football and he's been acting kind of weird, let's donate his brain to science. Or in some cases, the researchers literally contacted the families after the person's death and sought out the person's brain. So this is a very, very specific sample of people that we're talking about. And there's nothing wrong with this, and there's nothing wrong with this line of research. It's just a very specific group of people that they're talking about with these data. But to me, what's really of note here is that we don't know a ton about former high school athletes. So I'm going to ask a similar question that I did at the beginning. How many of y'all played any kind of sport in high school for at least like 1 year in high school? A lot of you. This is an incredibly, incredibly common level of sport exposure. So there are about 15 times the number of current high school athletes as there are collegiate athletes. And so right now and every year, and I've looked back at the records dating back to like a PDF that goes back to 1970, where it's like scanned records. And if you look back consistently, this is the case, where there are around 1 million high school football players for decades now. And about 67,000 kids go on to play in college sports. And this is true for many different types of sports. This general breakdown of roughly 6.7% of high school athletes go on to play collegiate sports. Obviously, I'm highlighting football here, but this is true of ice hockey, it's true of baseball, it's true of basketball. Most sports, this is the case, that this very small percentage of people go on to play at the collegiate level. And the people that are asking me if their kids should play football are not current D1 collegiate or NFL parents. They are the parents of elementary school kids or middle school kids or high school kids. And honestly, my answer to them is like, well, do you think your kid's gonna be in the NFL? Because like maybe then, start having conversations. But if you don't think so, if they're just gonna play through high school, we don't really know a lot about how former high school football players are looking later in life. So I think there's so much to be learned here from this more common level of exposure to sports. And so I wanted to highlight something that my lab is currently doing to hopefully begin to target some of this question. And so our primary question that we're focusing on right now is, does participation in collision sports, so here football, ice hockey, lacrosse, or rugby, at the high school level affect brain health later in life? And so our current study is focused on childhood participation in sport and how it affects the brain later in life. And we are in the process of recruiting 100 participants between the ages of 50 and 80. And we're looking specifically for people who either played a collision sport in high school or for women who played a contact sport as well, because I know Title IX, kind of the timing of Title IX passing fits right within our age window. And a lot of people who are women didn't have access to these sports at the high school level. Or who played a non-contact sport in high school. So specifically, we're looking at this like collision or contact versus non-contact distinction. And importantly, these are people who didn't participate in any sport beyond the high school level. These are just people who played high school level sports. And participants in our study are completing a variety of different cognitive and neurological assessments. And this is including questionnaires about sport history, health, things like that. We also have them do a set of questionnaires or a set of cognitive tasks on an iPad, so just kind of basic standardized cognitive assessments that are things that people do at doctors' offices and whatnot. And then we also have folks who kind of, as long as they're able to kind of tolerate it, come in for an MRI scan as well. And so this includes both scans of brain structure as well as scans of brain function. So structure, we're talking like the size of different parts of the brain, the kind of thickness of the cortex in different parts of the brain. And for function, we're looking at both like how your brain communicates with itself at rest, as well as differences in the way that you use your brain during an episodic memory task. So where you're having to remember new things, new pairs of things, and then recall them later. And so we've tested 12 people so far on the first part of our study, and then 8 people on the MRI scan, and things are going well so far. And so if you are at all interested, we are still looking for folks who played either collision or contact sports for men, or contact or collision and non-contact sports for women. So feel free to let me know if you want to come to our study. But I think the big question for me is, what do we do now? So every single day that I open up some news app on my phone, I'm seeing some news article about concussions and the risk for head impacts and things like this in sport. And so this is obviously a really important issue that we're not only grappling with, 30 years down the road for the people whose kids are in elementary school now, but also right now. So what can we do now to help people who are currently athletes? The first question I think a lot of people come up with is like, well, what if we just made the helmets better? And to me, I think making the helmets better is not going to prevent concussion. It's going to prevent skull fracture. I don't think that making a better helmet is necessarily going to get rid of concussions in sport. People have suggested all these different add-ons that we can have to helmets, all these different devices where maybe this can affect, reduce concussions, et cetera, et cetera. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think that this is going to be the thing that's going to solve our concussion problem. The next thing that people say is, well, what if we don't let kids play football until they're 14? You know, then they've had a lot of brain development and cognitive development. They're probably pretty stable. And so by the time they're 14, they're essentially adults, right? And so why don't we let them play sports at 14? As much as I love the concept of kind of helping kids, making sure that they're kind of safe before they play sports, the biggest issue I have with this is, one, the studies that we have showing that early exposure to football is bad for brain health later in life are mostly conducted in former elite athletes. So these are elite athletes who started playing football before age 14. It's not necessarily speaking to the normal exposure to athletics. The other thing that was brought up by my mentor in graduate school, Kevin Guskowitz, that I thought was an incredibly important point is when kids enter high school, kids are at such different levels of physical and emotional and cognitive development. At age 14, you have kids who still look like kids, like little kids, and you have kids who look like grown-ups. And so if you throw all these kids together on a football field and you're like, have at it, just tackle each other, go crazy, you've got varying levels of physicality, of development, of strength. There's so much different about these kids that to me is a huge risk for every kind of injury that one could imagine. And so if we just say you start at age 14, I think you're opening the floodgates to all kinds of stuff. And so to me, this also isn't the answer. I don't think this is going to solve everything. To me, I think the areas that we could really make strides in and that we really are already making strides in is I think a lot of different programs are starting to do fewer contact or fewer pads practices. So fewer practices where people are likely to sustain impacts to the head or concussions just in the practice itself. We're also doing a lot to change tackling technique. So there are a lot of people out there who are teaching proper tackling technique, keeping your head up, kind of making sure that you're aligning things properly when you're tackling, making sure that you're keeping your head out when you're tackling. A lot about changing the way that we interact with people in sport that's more of a behavior change rather than expecting your equipment to solve all the things you're doing wrong. We're also actively kind of working towards better coach and parent education. So I'm a member of the Michigan Concussion Center, full disclosure, and they have great educational materials for coaches, parents, everyone about concussion and kind of teaching them ways to spot a concussion, to potentially note signs that might be red flags for something that's more than a concussion, and to help kind of coach through the process of returning to play and returning to learn. And finally, and I will say this every single day until the cows come home, having more athletic trainers. Athletic trainers are the unsung heroes of every single sport. They give their life to these athletes and making sure that they are safe and healthy. And they've found that when you have an athletic trainer at practices or at games, kids tend to have better outcomes long term. So I will always advocate for having more athletic trainers, both at the high school level, any kind of level of sport. The more you can have an athletic trainer on site, the better. I will even say, very recently, yesterday my daughter fell down when she was at ice skating practice and she hit her head. They immediately rushed her over and I could see the concerned look on their faces as in like, is this woman gonna sue us? And so I meet my daughter there. I'm like, oh, hi, what happened? They tell me what happened. And I start kind of talking to my daughter and whatever. They send another person over. I'm like, oh, they're really scared now. And so I'm talking to her, kind of seeing how she's feeling and stuff. She's, of course, crying. But she was okay. She was okay. She was more just scared about what had just happened. And then the other person comes up and I say, don't worry. I actually study concussions. So don't worry. This is not going to become a situation. She was like, oh, thank God. I'm an athletic trainer. Like, I'm here for you. Like, if you need anything, just let me know. And I was like, honestly, wonderful. I'm so happy to know there's an athletic trainer on the ice when they're doing this because these are like 3- and 5-year-olds just skating around causing chaos. So I'm so happy you're here. But 2, don't worry. Like, I know what to look for. It's going to be okay. I know that this isn't a likely concussion. She seems like she's okay. She was more just scared. She's not even hurting. It's okay. So thankfully we sat it out for a little bit and she got back on the ice when she felt ready. Everything was okay. It's still okay, I think. But I was so happy to hear that they had someone who was an athletic trainer on the ice, even for ice skating lessons. Like, that's incredible to me. The more we can promote their work in every single venue, I am a super big fan of. Okay, so what about current athletes, current elite athletes even, or former athletes who are worried about their health? And so there are some things that we know. We're still learning a lot, but there's a good amount that we know that we're learning about these former athletes. But I would argue that we actually don't know a lot. We're still very much learning about these people, and what we don't know vastly dwarfs what we think that we know. And so I think we have so much more to learn about kind of what is going on in former athletes with histories of head impacts and concussions. And I think that there's a lot of room for where current research and future research can help us inform medical decisions and kind of sport decisions in the moment. And so still, what about former athletes? What I would say is the thing that we should look to is the things that help people regardless of kind of whether they were an athlete or not. It's ridiculous to think that former athletes are somehow aging on their own on some kind of island, and they're not suspect to the same kinds of effects of aging that the rest of us are suspect to. And so the same things that promote cognitive health and brain health and well-being throughout the lifespan in all of us are going to apply to former athletes too. So keeping moving, staying physically active, hugely helpful in aging. Eating kind of a well-balanced Mediterranean-style diet, also great. Managing stress, obviously, haha, but great, sure. Learning something new, so continuing to stay cognitively active, we know is great, regardless of where we are in our lives. Going to the doctor regularly, obviously a huge privilege, but the closer we are to medical care, the better. And also having a really strong social support network is super crucial towards cognitive and brain health and aging. So I think as long as we continue to promote these things in those former athletes, I think we're gonna at least be making small steps towards kind of good brain health and aging. And as we learn more about kind of the specific needs of former athletes, I think we'll do a better job of kind of helping them be less susceptible to some of these changes in aging. So before I end, I just have to thank the wonderful people who make everything in my lab run. My lab manager, Michaela, who's in the front, who's wonderful. She's actually presenting her research today at a conference in New Orleans, or maybe not today, maybe tomorrow, at a conference in New Orleans. She's amazing. My postdoc in my lab, James Shea, also incredible, does a lot of work in youth athletes. My PhD student, Julia Liskow, she also does wonderful work related to kind of concussions in youth. And then my incredible research assistants who are undergraduates at Michigan, Brooke Lang, Ainsley Adair, Brooke Essig, and Noor Abbas. They're all wonderful, and they're the only reason that we're able to do what we do. Also, if you want to participate in my study, subtle nod. But also feel free to just come up and talk to me. I'd love to chat. So thank you so much. And I'm happy to take questions. Perfect. Sure. I saw your hand. Yeah, so the question was about not all concussions seem to be the same, so is there a grading of concussions? So there is what's called the Glasgow Coma Scale, which is what they use to kind of assess general like TBI in general. So this goes anywhere from mild TBI, which is a concussion, to more severe TBI, including like extensive loss of consciousness, vegetative state, et cetera. So it's a relatively coarse scale, but we do also do a lot of symptom checklists with just kind of standard concussions, I guess, to get a sense of the severity of the concussion. But I agree, there's a huge variability in the severity, and that can have to do with like both the person as well as the type of hit that they sustained. And there are a lot of different ways that people can individually express signs of concussion. And so some people don't express any symptoms until 24 hours after concussion, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the symptoms are less severe. It might just mean that it's a delayed presentation. And so I feel like they joke about like if you've seen one brain, you've seen one brain. And I think that's especially true for concussions. I think people have so many different factors that make them more versus less resilient to the symptoms, to the course of recovery, et cetera, that I think there's so much variability, and it's so hard to be able to speak to that variability in an accurate way. So I think that's a huge point, that it's very hard to get a sense of like relative severity, especially when we don't currently have great objective measurements of concussion. And so right now we rely on symptom reporting. They're slowly starting to become better advances in terms of objective measurements of concussion. Like I know right now there's a blood test that's currently being, it's beginning to be used to kind of assess concussion within 24 hours of the injury. But again, I don't know whether the levels that they're testing correlate with like the behavioral severity of the concussion. So I think it's very much an open playing field, pun intended, for kind of how we assess the severity of the concussion from a more objective standpoint. But great point.
I have to interrupt, but good news, we're about to take a break. So if you have some questions, I'm going to snag this mic. Because I yell at people for not talking in the mic, and then I didn't talk in the mic. So come talk to Eleanna on the break if you've got questions. We will be back in 8 minutes with your next talk, but I'm not going to change to the break time slide so that you can scan that QR code. But no, it's break time. We'll see you in 8.
My name is Jacob. I'm also an employee at Ann Arbor District Library. I'm here to help Emily MC this event. Let's give a big round of applause for Emily live and our presenter, Eleanna. Clap it up! Come on! So I'm here to introduce our next presenter here. Her name is Molly Jones. Molly Jones is an improviser, composer, and data engineer. Her tools, my glasses, one second. Her tools include saxophones, flutes, found sounds, and machine learning models. And she's the founder of Chicago Creative Machines, an initiative promoting the original and ethical use of machine learning in the creation of art. Woo! Let's give a round of applause for Molly Jones.
Thank you. While I'm coming up here and setting up my slides, did anyone recognize the track that was just playing in the background there for the last little bit of the break? I see a nod. What do you know it from? It is the AI Drake song. Yeah, it came out in 2023. I call it Fake Drake. And it was Drake featuring The Weeknd, only it wasn't Drake or The Weeknd. It was actually some Canadian person sitting like in their basement making AI music that sounded like Drake. And it got nominated for a Grammy, and then the Grammys were like, wait, we can't nominate an AI for a Grammy, and they had to pull the nomination, and there were a bunch of people sued each other, and it was crazy. That happened in 2023, so just thought I would start with some AI music. Yes, this is who I am. My name is Molly Jones. And I'm here because I'm a PhD student at the university in the School of Music, Theater, and Dance. And my area of research is machine learning for creative audio applications. So making machine learning tools that composers, performers, other kinds of musicians can use to create their own original work. I also have a background as a data engineer working for a software company, and I also am a saxophonist and composer. As was mentioned, I started something about a year and a half ago called Chicago Creative Machines, which is an event series that promotes the work of artists who are working with building, training, programming their own machine learning models as part of their work. So the artists I am promoting are not people who are like using ChatGPT or Midjourney or DALL-E or any of these like sort of models that you have to pay a large company to use. They're people who are making their own machine learning tools for their own personal uses, which I'll tell you up front, I find much more interesting than just like typing a prompt into a website and getting some kind of AI generated thing. I think there's a lot more interesting ways to use machine learning. So I'll just tell you my opinion right out. But I think what we're gonna do is first I'll define a couple terms that I'll be saying over and over again throughout the talk, just so we're all on the same page about it. Some of you might be very familiar with machine learning or AI research, and that's cool. And then we'll listen to a bunch of examples of music made with sort of the latest machine learning tools. Some of these are gonna be companies like Google and Meta and OpenAI, these big companies with big budgets and big research teams that have made these really impressive models where you just type in a text prompt and it spits out music. And then we're also gonna be looking at examples of independent artists who are doing that thing I was describing, kind of making their own original tools in smaller, quirkier, more original ways, which is what I really care about. So to get started, I kind of want to define artificial intelligence, as hard a task as that is. Does anyone here have like a good working definition of AI they would want to share? You never know the crowd here, so there might be people. Oh yeah. What do you got?
I don't know if it's good. I've heard that it's statistics on steroids.
Ooh, I like that one, statistics on steroids. I am going to come back to that. I think that's a really good definition of machine learning, which we're going to talk about. That's the next term after artificial intelligence I'm going to talk about. I think that's a good one. Anybody else have one? So I'll share my kind of working definition is technology is performing tasks that require human intelligence. And this is kind of just kicking the can down the road because what it means is you now have to define human intelligence, which I feel like there's entire fields that are just dedicated to trying to do that, and I'm not gonna try to do that. Cognitive science, all kinds of fields of psychology, like I'm not gonna try to define human intelligence, but there is a quote I really like by a couple of researchers from the 90s. AI is the study of how to make computers do things at which, at the moment, people are better. you know, for decades, researchers said, knowledgeable researchers said, it's impossible for a machine to be good enough at chess to beat these world chess champions. It's just too much of an embedded human skill to know how to play chess well. Computer can never do that. And then in the 90s, Garry Kasparov gets beat by Deep Blue. And now we just move the goalpost and you're like, well, you know, chess really wasn't that hard of a thing for a computer to do, but it is impossible for computers to make art. That's ridiculous. That's such a deeply human task. We could never have a computer make art. And then you have Midjourney and DALL-E come out and they're making visual art that's actually kind of interesting sometimes. So, you know, we keep moving the goalpost. We keep changing what we think of as intelligent behavior. So what we consider AI is also changing. I'm also going to be using the phrase machine learning a lot. I'm going to use it kind of interchangeably with AI, and this is where the statistics on steroids thing comes back. Machine learning is a very popular set of techniques for working on AI. AI is this like massive research area, which we can talk about it later. I won't talk about it now, but I would argue the idea of AI goes back thousands of years. There have been ideas about machines that are intelligent for a very long time. Machine learning is a more recent set of statistics-based techniques that you can use with computers to work on AI, and it's very popular in the last few decades. So when I say machine learning and AI, I'm going to kind of use them interchangeably, and it is statistics on steroids. It's like tons and tons and tons of statistical calculations being done over and over again. And what happens in machine learning, unlike traditional computer programming, is that the computer actually learns the program on its own. It can learn a very complicated algorithm by itself. So whereas, oh yeah, I'm gonna come back to that in a sec. Oh, I think I deleted my other slide. Oh no. Yeah, whereas a traditional algorithm, a programmer goes line by line and says, okay, do this, now do this, now do this, now do this. With a machine learning model, instead, you just give the computer a huge amount of input data and a huge amount of matched up output data, and you tell it, okay, if I give you an input like this, I want you to give me an output like this. If I give you an input like this, I want you to give me an output like this. And over time, and a lot of statistical calculations, the computer learns that very, very complicated algorithm. So it allows computer to learn an algorithm much more complicated than what a programmer could actually just go in line by line and program. And computers are able to do this because the inside of a computer, although it is very dumb, goes like mad. This is what enables AI, it like kind of enables this explosion in AI that we're seeing right now, is that the computer technology has caught up with all the ideas around how computation can work, and now we're just getting this explosion in AI. So I'm gonna skip a lot of these slides. This is sort of a summary of the difference between a traditional algorithm where you have some input data, a programmer writes a process line by line, and then it calculates an output. In machine learning, we have a ton of input data, a ton of output data, and the computer learns the process iteratively. And just as a fun little visual, if you were to go over to the OpenAI servers, wherever they're located, and crack them open and look at what a machine learning model like DeepSeek or ChatGPT or any of these models look like, this is what it would look like. It's just a gigantic matrix of numbers. In the case of ChatGPT, they're kind of closed about exactly how that was made, so we don't know exactly how big it is, but it almost definitely has trillions of numbers in it. It's a matrix of trillions of numbers, which is more stars than are in the Milky Way. I looked it up. So these are very, very, very big models. So what does this have to do with music? So because in machine learning, right, the algorithm that the computer is learning on its own can be arbitrarily complicated and something more complicated than what a human programmer could create, potentially the task you could give a machine learning model is make some good music. Make some good music in a certain style. Help a composer make some music, right? So it's just another class of tasks that machine learning can help you with. And back in 1843, Lady Ada Lovelace, who's one of the inventors of computer programming, she had a long, she's really amazing. She had a very long letter exchange with Charles Babbage, who was an English gentleman who was the first person to design front to back a mechanical computer. It wasn't built in his lifetime, but he drew up plans for two completely different mechanical computers back in the 1840s, and they had a long exchange of letters. And in one of these letters, she writes, the analytical engine, which is one of these mechanical computers, might compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music of any degree of complexity or extent. So back in the 1840s, the dawn of computing, she already saw the potential of these machines to start making music. And we've had a lot of growth in computation. It's 182 years since she said that. So how is it going? How is it that computers are making music? Well, I would say it's going. AIs are making music. It's 2025. There are AIs out there making music, and some of them are more popular than others. And I want you all to each decide how successful you think the following examples of AI-generated music are. So just for fun, I'm going to ask you a couple times to like share your opinion. So can we practice doing something real quick? So if you like a musical example that we hear, I want you to give me a thumbs up and say, bravo. So can we practice that together? 1, 2, 3. Bravo. All right. And if you don't like an example, I want you to give me a thumbs down and say, boo, hiss. Can we do that together? 1, 2, 3. Boo, hiss. And then you can also just kind of shrug and go, if you're not quite sure how you feel about it. That's how I feel about a lot of these examples. It's like, music is a very hard thing to create with AI. There are fantastic examples of text generating AIs, obviously, ChatGPT, DeepSeek. There are really great image generating AIs that can, mash up multiple visual styles and do all kinds of cool processing on images. Music contains structure at a lot of different levels. If you think about like a symphony or a film score, there's rhythms in very tiny time scales. There's the overall structure of the piece. There's a correspondence between the piece and maybe a film. There's a huge number of levels of structure in music. It's a very, very hard thing for AI to do. So I would argue that AI-generated music is lagging a little behind AI-generated text and images in terms of its quality, but I want you to kind of be the judge of that. So I'm going to talk about kind of two general categories of AI-generated music. The first is going to be text-to-music generative models, and by that I mean things where you type in a text prompt and it spits out like an audio file. I think, as I mentioned earlier, these models tend to be by gigantic companies with gigantic research budgets and big engineering teams and access to tons of data, like Google and Meta and OpenAI. So these are often models that you can't access as an individual. You might be able to try them out on a little web portal, but they're not things you can like actually really mess with. But I just want to show you kind of the latest and greatest that these companies have produced, and we can kind of see how they're doing. So the first I'm going to show you is Music LM, which is by Google. It came out, let me see if I can switch where the, okay, we're good. Music LM came out in 2023. It's by Google. We're going to listen to a bunch of jazz examples just to kind of keep it consistent. And so you type in a text prompt and it just automatically generates something. So let's listen to what it calls relaxing jazz. I'm going to pause it there. So if you liked it, give me a thumbs up and a bravo. Woo, okay, harsh judges here. All right, if you didn't so much like it, give me a thumbs down and a boo hiss. Yeah, I feel that way too. It's a little affirming to hear you all kind of do that at the same time. Any like meh? Meh, okay, cool. Yeah, I feel that the timing is not what you would expect from actual live musicians who have actual senses of rhythm. If you listen to the whole excerpt, which is like a couple minutes long, the harmonies do some really nasty shifts into completely unrelated keys. It doesn't really get the idea. It gets some of the instrumentation. You can hear a bass, right? You can hear a piano, but it's not quite what you would want to sit down and listen to for an hour at your party. Okay, so The other big model that came out in 2023 was by Meta. It's called Music Gen. And I'll just go ahead and play the smooth jazz excerpt to keep the jazz thing consistent. The prompt here is smooth jazz with a saxophone solo, piano chords, and full snare drums. Okay, can I get a bravo from whoever likes this one? All right, how many boo hisses do I have? All right, any meh? Meh, okay, cool. This one has like some really weird bass frequencies. You'll note that the prompt says with a saxophone solo, and there was no saxophone. So this is one thing that these models find challenging, is knowing what the sounds of different instruments are. And at the end there, you'll also notice it was kind of forgetting what it was doing. Like the beat was phasing out. This is the thing with music, is it's linear. It goes from like point A to point B in time, and models have a lot of trouble keeping track of long-term structure. It's that structure at many levels thing. So a lot of the models, if you let them go, they just forget what they're doing, and they shift genres and they shift instruments completely. It's a little challenging. It's a challenging problem for AI researchers to solve. And for what it's worth, just to remind you, these companies have probably 20 PhDs just working on these models full-time for years. This is the best. Like, I don't want to knock the engineering that goes into this. It's truly astonishing. The fact that they can make this is actually amazing. This is actually the best they can do, though, which is like, meh. So this is my favorite model. This came out last year, and this is by a small startup called Harman AI that was bought by Stability, and it's called Stable Audio 2.0, and there's a dramatic improvement in the audio quality, like the actual recording type quality. So this prompt is an uplifting jazz song that makes your head shake. All right, I'll pause it there. All right, how many bravos do we have on that one? Yeah, hey, a few. How many boo hisses do we have? Got like one. Okay, so it's getting better, right? You couldn't see because of the screen, but basically this is also capable of generating much longer chunks of music than some of the other ones, which is a hard thing to do since it's hard to keep track of that long-term structure. I think this one sounds pretty good. The thing is, if you listen to the whole thing, the piano plays that same riff over and over and over and over and over again with slight variations, so like I also wouldn't put it on at a party, but it's like not terrible. The final one I'll show you just came out a couple weeks ago. This was like a week and a half ago. This thing came out of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Yeah is how the anglicized pronunciation, I am told. And it produces music partly based on lyrics generated by ChatGPT. So it's like a collab between ChatGPT and a music generating model. And it attempts to model specifically vocal styles. So I will play you Ye's jazz example, which is a song called Quiet Evening.
In the quiet of the evening, shadows start to fall. Whispers of the night theme echo through the hall. Lost within the silence, I hear your gentle voice, guiding me back homeward, making my heart rejoice. Don't look.
All right, how many bravos do we have on that one? All right, any boo hisses? Okay, hey, this was a moment for me when this came out. A friend was like, hey, check out this model that just came out, and she sent me this, and I put it on in the background and then I forgot it was on, and I was like checking my email and doing my stuff and just like jiving to it in the background. I was like, oh no, AI's done it. It's like become music that I will just put on and listen to in the background. So this is the first time that happened for me. So that was kind of a crazy thing. I'm not going to get into this too much. You may or may not have heard of these apps. Suno and Udio are apps you can like purchase and pay for their services. You type in a text prompt, it will generate an entire track. I'm pretty sure artists are suing them right now because what it generates is often just chunks of existing songs. So it's unclear what exactly they're doing. They are doing AI. It is definitely problematic. And that was where that Drake song I was playing in the interim came from. A Canadian artist who now goes by Ghostwriter gave an interview to Rolling Stone and admitted that they used Suno to produce that entire track that was fake Drake. So Suno and Udio are interesting if you want to like actually get into trying to generate stuff. You can like pay them on their website and generate stuff, but you might also get sued. So this now I'm going to get into the portion where it's not so much about big companies and their big models where you type in text and it spits out music. This is more just quirky individual artists building their own machine learning models with their own data and kind of doing more interdisciplinary art using machine learning, which is the thing I really care about. And this is what I showcase in the Chicago Creative Machines series that I run, which incidentally, while I'm thinking about it, these events take place in Chicago at a place called Experimental Sound Studio. They are there are going to be 4 of them this winter. They're coming up starting on February 23rd, Sunday afternoons, but they are streamed live online. You can watch them from anywhere. They're available on the Experimental Sound Studio website kind of permanently. So if anyone's interested in this stuff, these artists will come present in a couple of weeks for the next like 4 Sundays. You can check it out online if you want. So I'll start with Hugo Flores Garcia. He's a friend of mine. He's a guitarist and a synthesizer player. And he designed a model called VampNet. And what VampNet does is it takes a little chunk of music that you play yourself, and it blocks out little sections of it. So you have little sections of silence in this little piece of music you've created yourself, and then the model fills in those blank spaces with sounds that it thinks fit the kind of frequencies and mood of what you've given it. So it enables you to generate little variations on something you yourself created. So what he'll do in live performances, he'll be playing the guitar, he'll play something, he'll record it, he'll send it to the model. The model will generate little variations on it, and then he'll improvise a duet with the model that's like based on his own sound. So I'll play you some examples. So I'll start with the input, that like his example input. So this is something, a beat he made that he fed into the model. Okay, just a little 10-second clip. And then here are a couple of the things the model generated based on that he then kind of riffed on. And one of the cool things about VampNet, and the reason he called it VampNet, is that it preserves the rhythm of the original. So you can make a beat, you can put in a beat or play something in a rhythm, and it'll preserve that, and then it'll create little variations. And that's actually anyone who is technically inclined. This is open source, available online on GitHub. Just look up VampNet GitHub, and you can like download it and play with it if you would like. I'll play a little excerpt now of my friend Hunter Brown, who he's a laptop artist. He does kind of like noisy experimental sound work. And he uses a toolkit called Flucoma, which is also open source and available if you're interested in playing with these things. And basically what it does is it learns how you like to move when you control a computer. So it keeps track of where your fingers are on the XY, like the trackpad. It keeps track of where your eyes are on the camera. And what it does is it learns what sounds you like to hear when you move your hands in certain ways. And then all you have to do is move your hands in those ways, and it'll produce sounds that it thinks you would like according to your motions. So this one, unfortunately, I can't show the video of, but I will play you a little clip of the sound. He basically has an iPad and he's just moving his finger around on it. So I'll just play a little clip of that, but that's sort of an example of how a machine could learn how to copy your gestures when you perform and enable you to make sounds in sort of the space, the physical space you like to perform in. Oh, I wish I could show the video. Is there any way I can show the video from here, or is it only slides that I can show from here? I don't know if anyone can. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I see. So this piece is by Julie Zhu, and this piece is part of a larger project that's called Deep Drawing. And so Julie is a visual artist by background, and so what she has done is she has taped 4 contact microphones to this surface on which she is drawing, and what she takes in is the sound from the 4 microphones, and she's training a machine learning model to learn where her pen is based on the sound coming into those 4 microphones. And so right now she's inside a box. The audience can't see her. She's drawing, and then the machine learning model is taking the information from those microphones and guessing where her pen is, and what's being shown is a projection of what it's guessing she's drawing. So I'll play a little excerpt of that. And this is very much still a work in progress, and sometimes what it draws resembles exactly what she's drawing, and sometimes it just goes off the rails and guesses something else, but that's sort of part of the interest of the piece. The last artist I will show is Holly Herndon. She was actually one of the first people to really get into this. She's a vocalist and composer, and so this piece is, this model is from 2022. It's also available, you can try it online, it's called Holly Plus. And basically you can just upload an audio file and it'll come back in her voice. So you can say or sing whatever you want and it just comes back in her voice. And she made this available because she kind of wanted to democratize, like make accessible these machine learning models that she'd trained on her own voice over so many years. So I'll just show a quick example of that.
I'm swimming further up the road. See, the problem is I don't know what to say when you come around acting this way. And yes, the truth is I show you every day.
'Cause you love to stay living in all the pain.
And it gets so murky, loving what you know. But I'll keep on swimming further up the road.
Pause it there. All right. How many thumbs up, bravos do we have for this one? A few. How many thumbs down, boo hisses do we have for this one? None? Okay, cool. Yeah. Those are all the examples I have for you. Just to kind of show a little variety of what it's possible to do with machine learning that's not something you have to pay for or something that somebody else has trained. There are a lot of possibilities. And so that's what Chicago Creative Machines is kind of dedicated. And I'm all about starting discussions about these things because I think a lot of artists are afraid of being steamrolled and replaced with technology, but I think that it's possible for artists to kind of work with these technologies and do their own projects. So if you want any further information, Chicago Creative Machines has a website with like a ton of links to all these things, links to way more things. And I also, there's a lot of links on here if you're interested in AI stuff, and there's a QR code if you want these slides, because it'll have links to all the stuff you've seen today. So that's what I have for you. Thank you so much.
Let's give it up for Molly Jones. Alrighty, folks, we got 9 minutes of break for you here. We'll see you back in 9 minutes. Get something to drink, tip your bartender, ask Molly a question, drop your phone. Gonna learn some cool stuff. How about another round of applause for our speakers this evening? My name is Jacob. I'm back again to introduce our next speaker, who happens to be Frank Murphy. I got my glasses on better this time. I can read it good. Frank escaped the land of increasingly hotness, Florida. Florida? Round of applause for Florida. That was a trap. To study in the land of endless snow, Michigan. Michigan Tech, to be exact. He stands before you as a fully naturalized Michigan transplant. One of his teeth is backwards, and he's otherwise a relatively modern thinker. He works for an ML startup. What does ML stand for? Machine learning. Yeah, I learned that the last presentation, or the first presentation, and resides in Ann Arbor with his wife, Emily, who is the other MC tonight. Clap it up. We definitely did not bribe to get a speaker slot for this talk. No. Let's clap it up for Frank Murphy.
Thank you. I get the joy tonight of being the bad cop in this good cop, bad cop AI routine. As you just heard, my name's Frank Murphy. I work for an AI startup called Wallaroo, and the opinions I express in this talk tonight are my own. So, this book, Superintelligence, has been kind of making a splash in technical circles over the last few years, and it's even highly recommended by Bill Gates. And I think its prominence is unwarranted. Let me explain why. Everybody has a happy place. Yours might be with a good book curled up under a blanket and a nice hot cup of coffee. For engineers, our happy place is solving hard problems. And superintelligence is a hard problem. It's like, ooh, what if a machine becomes so smart that we have to devise strategies to keep it at bay? How delightfully interesting as a problem. And here's the problem with this whole view of the world. We don't have this problem today. We actually have a bunch of other problems on which the book Superintelligence doesn't really speak very much about. So I instead would perhaps recommend the book Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari. I'm hopefully saying that correctly. Nexus is a sort of history of information networks, how technology has changed them over time, and the resulting changes to power structures that have come from that. And it talks a lot about the current moment because, spoiler alert, the aliens are already here. I talked about this a bit in my prior talk, but of course not everyone here was there for that. So let me recap. This is Gritty. Gritty was introduced as the mascot for the NHL team, the Flyers, back in 2018. My reaction upon seeing Gritty was to echo Dr. Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they didn't stop to think if they should. Now, another NHL team had a more pithy reaction to Gritty's introduction, just saying, well, okay. To which Gritty responded, sleep with one eye open tonight, bird. Gritty is an alien. He's terrifying, an enigma, a mystery. As such, we do not trust him with important things. This is a disturbing contrast to machine learning models. Society is rushing to incorporate them in everything, everywhere. And I would say the core point of my prior talk is that we should treat machine learning models less like some kind of benevolent helper working in our best interest, and more like Gritty, a harbinger of chaos that is difficult to understand or control. Now today, I want to talk about one particularly important area where Gritty is invading our lives. Everyone, raise your hand if you consume content from any of these platforms. Lots of people, practically ubiquitous. I mean, obviously the Amish probably don't, but pretty much everyone probably gets something from one of these platforms these days. Now, all of these platforms have kind of a similar problem, which is humans are creating more content than ever. So how do they decide from this vast sea of content what small little slice to show to you? The answer, you might be able to guess, is machine learning. It's the solution that every data engineer turns to these days for these big data kinds of problems. And we should pay attention to the Gritty behind this curtain because we are learning disturbing things about how he operates. You see, these companies all focus very extensively on a metric that's called engagement. It's basically how much time you're spending interacting with, viewing the site. And it's obviously important for ads, which are the lifeblood of the internet, and it's done great for all of these companies. They're all more valuable than ever. However, we are learning that engagement while great for these companies, might not be great for society as a whole. Content producers are reacting to this new media landscape by deliberately posting content that is inflammatory, that is divisive. And this has obvious downsides and obvious dangers. And I can say that, like, in the extreme cases, people literally have died. And it's natural in this sort of situation to look for somebody to blame. Is it the content consumers? Is it the content producers? Is it the algorithm? Like, what do we fix? How do we stop this? And the answer, kind of unfortunately, is all of the above. These things are a sort of ecosystem, and ecosystems have all kinds of complex feedback effects. So you have to understand and study them as a whole. And any sort of fix to one component can often generate unexpected effects in others. There's an interesting parallel here also to this idea of ultra-processed food. Ultra-processed food is food where every single part of the production process of the food is geared towards creating a satisfying eating experience for consumers. And they use all kinds of novel processes like hydrogenated oils and other things to make this happen. And we kind of instinctively recognize that these foods are probably not great for us, best enjoyed in moderation. And there's also an increasing body of research showing that it is the ultra-processed, like the focus on hyperpalatability in the processing of these foods that makes them dangerous and addictive. The platforms I just listed are producers of ultra-processed information. It is designed to engage you, not to inform you. You wouldn't eat a bowl of Cheetos for dinner. Well, you probably shouldn't. I highly recommend not making these the core of your information diet. And, of course, a natural reaction to looking at these ecosystems is like, how do we fix them, right? And I kind of talked about this, who to blame, but maybe there's systemic changes we can make, to like goals or other things that can help in this situation. And this brings us right into what our industry is currently calling the alignment problem. Now, I believe the alignment problem is a new name for an old problem. I think the best illustration of it is this, The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Van Gogh. You can see here that we nerds have a long and storied tradition of dressing sloppily. So the story begins with an apprentice enchanting a broomstick to turn it into a helpful worker. And he does what any of us would do afterwards. He tasks this creation with doing a job that he absolutely hates. And his new worker is great at this job. It's even faster than the apprentice at this chore. It's too fast. And there's much more water than is needed. The apprentice desperately tries to stop his creation. He even resorts to smashing it into bits, only to find it working faster than before. The story ends with the apprentice drowning in more of what he wanted than he could ever need, and with his creation showing no signs of stopping. Our apprentice has what AI experts would call an alignment problem. The broomstick is doing exactly what he asked it to, and the result is a disaster that he did not intend. And this is not a new problem. We have long struggled to ensure that autonomous entities like governments, corporations, have the right goals, to bend them to our will. And from this struggle flows the old wisdom. Be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. I believe that the companies behind these platforms are wishing for a very dangerous thing. They're hoping to kind of just ignore what is going on the platforms and hope that everything turns out okay. And I think the problems here are kind of obvious, but I think that Harari illustrates it best in what might be the core point of the book, Nexus. He uses the parable of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. Congratulations, you have now thought about the Roman Empire today. Now, Tiberius was a effective but kind of paranoid emperor, and he turned increasingly to the captain of his guard, Lucius Aelius Sejanus, and I'm probably saying that wrong too, because he didn't trust the people around him. He was paranoid. And Lucius took advantage of this state of affairs. He used it to eliminate his rivals, to isolate the emperor politically. He even was able to convince the emperor to retreat to his palace on the island of Capri. At this point, Lucius controlled the flow of information to and from the emperor. He could censor news he didn't want the emperor to see. He could disappear commands that he didn't want to take effect. In other words, Lucius was the nexus of the empire, not Tiberius. Tiberius was a puppet emperor. Tiberius did eventually figure out that this was all going on, and he returned to Rome so furious that he had all records of Lucius destroyed and all statues demolished. And that was a big deal. In Rome, as far as I can tell, statues were the equivalent of Facebook profile photos. So the thing is, though, that the emperor never really was able to figure out who to trust. He elevated his savior from Lucius to the captain of his guard. He made him the new captain of the guard, and he was rewarded for this by being strangled by the same person several years later. Okay, so enough about ancient Rome, right? Let's bring this parable into the modern day. We're talking about computers, right? So a lot of popular culture depictions of machine takeovers of society are dramatic, you know. Skynet becomes self-aware, starts marching Terminators through the streets, or we give a computer nuclear codes and it decides it wants to kill all of us, and it's a race against time to save humanity. Nexus posits a different scenario that's a little more realistic and, in my opinion, disturbing. Let's say we have a Russian president, and he's grown increasingly paranoid about the humans around him. They're constantly mutinying and plotting against him. So he's decided that humans cannot be trusted, and he tasks his engineers with building a bespoke AI system to keep tabs on his lieutenants, on the populace. For no reason in particular, let's call this AI Sejanus. Of course, it is completely unrelated, and any resemblance to the prior Sejanus we saw is purely coincidental. One night, Sejanus wakes the president with an urgent message. His defense minister has been plotting against him. He's assembled a hit squad and is making his move. They're in a helicopter on the way to the president's dacha. The president has to act quickly, order air defense to shoot it down. But maybe there is no hit squad. Maybe it's just a defense minister and some programmers. The AI has been acting increasingly odd recently. They think it might be hiding something. We have now arrived at a familiar place. Sejanus cannot command the army, does not have the nuclear codes, but it has become the nexus of information in Russia. Now, this is still a dramatic scenario, right? The AI might decide instead to subvert the president, over years. He might, isolate him from his supporters, feed him information that basically enhances his paranoia. And in fact, this dramatic nighttime coup scenario might not be the safest way for the AI to consolidate power, and it might do something a bit different. And let's be honest also, autocracies have fewer checks and balances than democracies, but democracies are not immune to this problem. It's not impossible to imagine some AI Sejanus controlling the discourse for a plurality, even a majority of the population. It could become an integral part of the messaging apparatus of some political party. And in a democracy, that would endow Sejanus with its own power. Insiders might be afraid to shut it down if it becomes critical to their continued political relevance, even if they become aware of a hidden dark nature. On the flip side, there's also a bunch of people that just think AI will quickly become better at just governance than humans. And they will, at this point, we should just hand over control to them and usher in a new digital utopia. Begone old icons of gold and silver. The new idols are made of ones and zeros. Now, I obviously take a pretty dim view of this. I don't think we should be deifying these false idols, because I think doing so runs the risk of asking them questions for which they are not prepared. My favorite example of this, aside from this great picture, comes from Janelle Shane. She trained a machine learning classifier to take in the names of anything, just any name, right? And classify it. What's the percentage chance that this is a My Little Pony, which I think is the right term for that, or a death metal band, right? So sure, of course, Rainbow Dash, Pony, despised icon, death metal band. She then had the classifier work on the names of various famous Star Wars characters. And of course, hilarity ensued. Asking these machines important questions like how to run a just society runs the risk of just setting them up for failure, and it sets humanity up for disaster. You see, what these machines are trained on is akin to human childhood. Any bias they receive, any trauma in the data, they will carry with them for the rest of their existence. And this sort of bias, this trauma, can come out in strange, unexpected ways, and in ultimately things that we can't predict. So here's the deal. The people that train these models, they effectively control what the models see and learn while they're young. They are feeding the models their whole understanding of the world. So they hold immense sway over what the model will eventually choose to believe and do. And we have to like regard these AI parents kind of suspiciously. But at the end of the day, it takes a village to raise a child. We all bear some responsibility for ensuring that these models are well adjusted, for ensuring that they are corrected, that they can be corrected when they misbehave. And I really, really want to emphasize that I think that this is a very dangerous line of thinking. Just shutting our eyes to what these models are doing and hoping for the best could set us up for all kinds of disastrous outcomes. Now, the good news is, as many parents know, small changes to incentives can make major differences in how the end user behaves. So one of my favorite examples of this is this idea of bridging algorithms. They are a proposal that we align these new social media DJs to effectively reward them for building connections between communities instead of stoking engagement within them. And I say that we need to be looking for, asking for, demanding these sorts of things. In this new information economy, in this brave new world, our eyeballs are the currency, and we need to be sure that we're spending them wisely. I'd argue to be wary about these gritty machine learning models that are increasingly replacing the news anchors in our lives. These are a proto-intelligence that are awakening among us. They're aliens. We have made first contact. It's not going well. They run our social media. We're seeing how that influences our politics. Their influence will only continue to grow, and things can get worse. If we let it, gritty could become Sejanus. So we need to be looking for accountability, transparency. We need to understand how these things are shaping what we see, what we share. We need to make sure that they're aligned properly, they have the right goals, and that we have the right feedback mechanisms, crucially, to correct them if they go off the rails. Otherwise, we might find ourselves on an island, isolated by our robot information curators, oblivious to the warnings of our friends and loved ones, and the machines will be in control. All right, I know that was all depressing, but thank you everyone for your eyes and ears today. I can say that all of these books are available at your local AADL. I particularly recommend You Look Like a Thing and I Love You by Janelle Shane if you want to understand more about how these aliens act, how they think, how they can go wrong. The My Little Pony death metal example was shamelessly stolen from her. And thank you all for your attention today. Does anyone have any questions? Or are we doing applause first? I can do applause. Can we do applause? Yep. We have time for one or two questions. I see one hand went up pretty quickly. Yes?
What does transparency look like for AI?
That is a very good, the question was, what does transparency look like for AI? That is a very good and a very hard question. One example that's like the bare minimum is open weights, which most AI companies don't even do these days. But really what transparency looks like is full open everything. Knowing what they were trained on, which very few companies do, and knowing what they were trained for. What was the goal? Like what were they trying to optimize while training? I think you need both of those to have transparency, and a lot of companies are not providing that these days. And honestly, they have incentives not to, so that's something where we as society, I think, need to come and step in. Thank you, great question. Yes?
I don't mean this to be like a too personal question, but I'm curious, as someone who works at a startup with AI, how you balance your desire for like transparency and ethics and all these values to be embedded in AI with like the needs of a company and your corporate life.
Yes. So what was asked was someone that was attempting not to be too personal, but asking a personal question of like, this is something that I work in, and how do I balance, you know, needs of a company and needs of my own like personal ethics in terms of like, how do we ensure these things, everything I just talked about, right? And that is a tough question. I am fortunate where I work has an emphasis on what's called explainability, or I'm of course blanking on the word, but like basically just recording what these models do is incredibly important, right? Observability, there it is, that's the word. You know, like here, what was the input? What was the output? What was the prediction? What did it generate? You know, like logging all this stuff, because that's the first step if like you see them doing stuff wrong, you know, like the very first thing is you need to have a record that happened. So I'm fortunate in that sense that like I try and choose places that I work that are aligned with my own personal goals. But it's still tricky, and there's reasons I can't talk about that. But like there are cases where these things come into conflict. I think lots of people see that throughout the course of their employed life. And I fortunately have not come to the point where it like comes to the decision of like, well, do I step away from this job that I really enjoy and that's honestly doing pretty well for me? And like I've thought often about what the red lines for that would look like. Unfortunately, they're probably pretty catastrophic, and we could get there. But like, I think it does come down to, you know, like, are they at least pushing some things in the right direction? Which is why I'm staying where I am, because I think that we are in terms of making sure we're observing these things, and from that, making sure that we can like track when they're going wrong, and you know, at least try and alert the right people to fix them. That feedback mechanism I talked about, super important. Harari talks about it all the time. And that's like not even with AI. That's important for, you know, systems that are just made of humans. So, does that answer your question? Thank you. And I think that's it for time. Again, thank you all for your attention today.
All right. Thank you, Frank. I'll tell you, as someone who's heard that talk 3 times, you learn something new every time. So if you want to watch the stream and join me in the 3-timers club, that's there. But just to remind you, we do this every month. Next month, so easy to remember because February is a 4-week month. So guess what? Today's the 13th. It's Nerd Nite. Next month, Nerd Nite is also on the 13th. So I hope to see you there. But if you want a reminder, I send out an email to the mailing list, usually the Monday before Nerd Nite, and on the right past the coat rack as you leave, you can pick up a free sticker no matter what. And if you would like to put down your name for the mailing list, that would be great. I'll also ask if you're looking to do a good deed today and want to help someone and you're sitting in a chair, if you're so moved to bring that chair up to the 2nd floor, bonus points. If not, don't worry. I'm so glad you're here. You already did your good deed by coming. So thanks. Hope to see you in 4 weeks.